everyone, welcome to my craft room. I'm Leo from inkymemories.co.uk. I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator based in South Wales. Today we're going to be completing a project using the Lovely You stamp set and the Lovely Labels Pick-a-Punch. And we're going to be making a birthday card today. Now, as this is a Simple Saturday project, I do have all of my pieces pre-cut and ready to go. So I'll just pop through those. So we have here a card base. This is in Pool Party, and this is just a simple piece. It's a half a sheet of A4 basically. So this measures 14.85 centimeters by 21 centimeters, and it is scored at 10.5 centimeters. I also have then one Whisper White envelope. I have two pieces of Whisper White cardstock here. This one is for the front of the card, and this one measures 13.85 centimeters by 9.5 centimeters. And I also have one for the inside of the card, and this one is 13.35 centimeters by 9 centimeters. I have a small strip of Whisper White card. This is for our sentiment, and this measures 2.5 centimeters, and it can just be any length you want. This is just a scrap that I've used here. And I also have a piece of In Colour Designer Series paper, and this comes from the new stack. So this is the 2020 to 2022 In Colour Designer Series paper, and as you can see, this is a 6-inch squared or 15.2 centimeters squared pack, and it comes in all 5 of the new In Colours. You've got Misty Moonlight in there, Cinnamon Cider, Magenta Madness, Bumblebee, and Just Jade. And each in the pack there are 2 different designs in each colour. So the first one is this spotted design on one side, and the reverse of that is this sort of almost Hessian kind of textured. The other piece then has these words on here. So this is actually phrases from our statement of the heart with Stampin' Up. So it says in here, to love what we do and share what we love, and this is repeated in multiple different languages. And then the reverse of that is this nice sort of wood grain pattern, and we're going to be using the wood grain today in Just Jade. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just fold my card base along the score line, and just using a bone folder, I'm just going to burnish that score, like so. And I'm going to take the piece of Designer Series paper and bring in a second punch. This is the Label Me Lovely punch. Very similar name to the Lovely Labels punch, but as you can see, very different punches. I'm just going to punch a piece out of the Designer Series paper here. So just lining this up in my punch, making sure that I've got a nice piece of the pattern in here. So I'm actually going to move this more over the centre of this sort of knot in the wood grain and just punch that out. Now I'm going to take the larger of the 2 pieces of Whisper White cardstock, and this is the piece that's actually going to layer onto the front of the card. So as you can see, we have a very small border all the way around the edge of this once it all layers together. And taking the piece of Designer Series paper, I'm going to pop it onto my card front roughly where I want it to be. And then using a pencil, I'm just going to make a couple of small faint dots around the edge of this piece, just so I know roughly where it sits on the card front, which you can just see around the edge of there. And that's going to help me line up the stamps where I want them to go, so they'll be nicely centered around our piece. And the stamps that I'm using today, I'm using a couple of the different sort of foliage flourishes from in here. So I'm using this leaf spray, this stem, and these 3 leaves here. And I'm going to stamp first of all in Just Jade ink. We're going to be using a technique today called stamping off, which is where you can get multiple different shades of the same colour from a single ink pad. So I'm going to start with this smaller one here. I'm going to ink it up, so just taking my stamp to the ink pad, lightly tapping on the surface to make sure I've got good even coverage of ink all the way over. And using my grid paper, or if you have scrap paper under your project, that would work too. Just stamp onto the grid paper, and that takes off the first layer of ink from your stamp. And then using the dots that I've put on the white mat that I've got here, I'm going to use those as a guide as to where I want my stamping to be. So I'm going to make sure that the end of the stamp is within the dot, so it's going to be hidden by the piece of designer series paper. I'm going to stamp once, so that's our second generation stamping. And I'm going to stamp again, and that's our third generation. So you can see between all three, you get quite a different variation in colours. I'm going to repeat this to make sort of a cluster of leaves around the edge of where the designer series paper is going to sit. I'm going to take then the leaf spray and do a very similar thing here. So I'm going to stamp off. I'm just going to pop one of these up here and bring it right back in. So because all of this section is going to be hidden by the designer series paper, you can vary the length of your stems by bringing the centres or the sort of end part of the stamp closer into the middle. I'll do another one in here. And just one down on this side. Like so. And then I'm going to take the 3-leaf stamp, and I'm actually going to do this one at full strength ink over the top. Just to fill in some of those gaps. Like so. The next thing I'm going to do then is add a couple of the flower stamps, and this time I'm going to be using the Magenta Madness ink. And so I have the small flower stamp. I'm just going to add a couple of these at full strength, just in and amongst the leaves. Just like so. While I have the stamps and the ink with me, I'm going to pop a couple on my envelopes. As I'm sure you've heard me say before, we don't have any naked envelopes in my craft room. I like to make sure that my the people that receive my cards know there's something pretty inside them before they even open the envelope. So I'm going to do just a couple of stamps on the edge of the envelope here as well. And then the same on the other piece of Whisper White that's going to go inside the card. Going to do a slightly different variation again on this one. Just like so. And I'll pop a flower onto both of those as well. Okay, the last piece of stamping that I want to do before we start to assemble the card is for the sentiment. Now, the sentiment that I'm using today is from the Peaceful Moments stamp set, and I'm going to be using the Happy Birthday sentiment that is up here, and I'm actually going to do this in 2 different colours. So I have the stamp here mounted onto my clear block, and if I flip this over, what we're going to be using for this are the Stampin' Write markers. Now these markers are filled with the same ink that is in our ink pads. They coordinate beautifully, they will come out exactly the same colour as you see from the ink pad. And they have 2 different tips on them, so you have a sort of firmer bullet tip and then a brush tip at the end. And with these, using the brush tip end, I'm literally going to use the marker to colour the stamp for me. So I want to have the word birthday in the Magenta Madness. So I'm just going to use the side of the brush tip to colour in the stamp all the way over it, just making sure that I get the ink from the marker all the way over that stamp, and then it covers all of the edges for me. And then using the Just Jade marker, I'm going to colour in the word happy across the top of the stamp. And this ink will stay wet for a few seconds, so you don't need to rush too much. I'm going to bring in here my piece that I have for my sentiment. If you're worried that the ink has dried a little bit and you're not going to get a good stamp, if you just breathe over it, the moisture in your breath will actually reactivate the ink for you. And I'm going to leave a small gap at the side and then just pop my sentiment down, and then holding the piece at the bottom, just lift it straight back up. And then I have my sentiment stamped in 2 different colours. I'm going to punch the sentiment using the Lovely Labels Pick a Punch, and again I'm using the square side of the punch. As you can see, because we've cut this at 2.5 centimetres, this is going to be the full width of the stamp, the punch this time around. So flipping this punch over, I'm just going to make sure that the cardstock lines up nicely into here, and then punch that. And then using the waste from the punch, I'm just going to get this to help me to line up where I want to cut my piece down, ready to punch the other side, so that my sentiment is nicely centered across the 2 pieces. And for that, I'm just going to use my snips and just cut straight up this edge. So again, just flipping this over to make sure that it's all nicely lined up across the surface of the punch. And once I'm happy with that, I'll punch that out. And there is our nicely centered sentiment. So all I'm going to do now then is start to layer up the card, starting with our base piece. I'm going to put some of the in colour ribbon in Magenta Madness across the front of the card. So I want this to sit roughly here across the front. So I'm just going to take my snips and cut the edge of that. And what I'm going to do is, using the stamping seal, so this is an adhesive tape runner, I'm just going to pop a little line of adhesive up both sides of this white cardstock. Line my ribbon up across the front where I want it to sit. Once I'm happy, I'm just going to fold this around the side, and that will stick into the line of adhesive that we've put on the back. And then I can pull it straight across the front of my card, making sure not to pull it too tight or it will actually distort the cardstock, and you don't want that to happen for the front of your card. Once I'm happy that that is lined up, again, I'm just going to stick the ribbon around the side like so. And then I'm going to glue this to my card front, and I'm actually going to use liquid glue for this. And with the liquid glue, you just want to run a very thin bead of glue right around the edge of your card. You don't want to add too much. If you do put too much glue on, you will find that it will sort of squeeze out of the sides as you put your card together, and you'll end up with a bit of a sticky mess. And because we are using the liquid glue, we do have a couple of seconds of wiggle room once it hits the front of our card, just in case you need to make any adjustments to where you've lined it up. Okay, I'm happy with that, so I'm just going to press that down. And then I'm going to take my piece of DSP that I punched out earlier, and I'm going to attach this using dimensionals. And we're going to attach it this way around, so the squarer edges go over the side of the ribbon. And I want to make sure the dimensionals don't go over the ribbon itself. You can find sometimes that it will not stick fully and that the piece will actually rock on the front of your card. So I'm going to aim for above and below the ribbon with the dimensionals. Just peeling the backs off the dimensionals to reveal the adhesive on the back. And then position your punched piece of DSP where you want it to go. And once you're happy with the position, just pop that into place. So you can see it covers up the centre of all of the stamping that we've done, so you don't see any of the stems that are in the middle. Then the happy birthday piece is going to sit across the middle like so. And again, I'm going to pop this on dimensionals. As you can see, this sheet, I've used all of the dimensionals out of the middle, but there are still plenty of pieces of adhesive on here to use. So just taking a pair of snips, I'm going to cut myself a segment from these edge pieces. I'm going to use that instead. So even though it may look like I've used all of my dimensionals, I still have a lot of adhesive still left to use on there. And these pieces work just as well. It's all the same material, it just isn't cut into the hexagons for you. I'll line this up over the front, making sure that it's nicely centered on that piece of DSP that I punched before. And the last thing then to do is just to glue the inside of our card in. So again, I'm going to use the liquid glue for this and just run a thin bead of glue all the way around the edge. And then a little bit across the middle. Pop that down. As I said, if you do need to adjust it slightly, you do have a few seconds once the glue hits the paper before it actually bonds, so you can give it a wiggle if you need to. Make sure that is securely in there. And there is our finished card, along with a beautifully stamped envelope that is sure to brighten anyone's day once it hits the doormat. Thank you for joining me for this Simple Saturday project. I do hope you've enjoyed this and that you give it a go yourself. As always, the details of all the products used in this video are listed in the description box below. If you are based in the UK and you don't currently have a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, I'd be happy to get a copy of any of our current catalogues out to you. In the description box below, there will be a link directly to my website where you can sign up, and I'll get those straight into the post for you. If you have any questions about the project or anything to do with Stampin' Up! Or any comments about the project that I've put together today, please do leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to help you out. Thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.